So what do we mean by social welfare? Well, there's two components, obviously. Social, meaning the collective nature of society, and welfare, which implies well-being or a state of healthy balance. When we put them together, it means the well-being of society, or at least that's what we're striving for. Why should we study this? Well, one, it's about us because we both are recipients, but we're also providers. If you work in human services or a nonprofit agency or the government, you're going to be a provider of social welfare services. So it's really important to understand the whole social welfare system because a lot of times it explains why you may be having trouble getting things for clients or even for yourself sometimes. As citizens, we're policymakers. We basically have some influence over policy by who we vote for, informing our legislators about what's important to us, and sometimes not just in lobbying and advocacy efforts, but sometimes we may get jobs where we're in positions to influence policy. So we want to understand the influence that values and beliefs have on social welfare policies and systems. And that has been no more apparent than it is right now. If you look at the news, what you're going to see is very disparate values at work. And so you're going to be seeing systems changing policy based on a value system, and sometimes that value system will not match yours. So it's important to understand that. So when we look at social welfare systems, we need to be involved with social issues. And again, if you want to look at the news every day, there's certainly plenty of those to go around at the moment. Policy goals, what are we trying to do with our policies? What's going on with legislation and regulation. A big problem right now is that we're not passing a budget for the state, and that's having very difficult consequences for not just nonprofit agencies and other people providing services, but also the schools. And it also, again, trickles down to programs, and that's, again, the example of not passing the budget. So, what are the questions that we need to ask when we see a new policy in place or we're trying to fix an old policy or a policy goes away? Well, for one, who gets the services? Why are they getting the services? What is it they get? And how do they get it? What does it cost? And who's going to pay for it? And as you know, who pays for it has been a big item in the news. Eligibility, so does everybody get this benefit, or is this something you have to be eligible for? What are the goals of the program? What are they trying to fix? What are the benefits? And how well is that service delivery system working? Because what you're going to find is that we can pass laws and put policies in place, and we can have it funded and everything, but it won't be successful if we don't implement it appropriately. So sometimes services fail because the delivery system is not adequate or there's a problem. The other thing we need to look at is a cost analysis. Does the cost of this service match what we get out of it? Or are we spending a lot of money and getting very little for our money? And finally, how are we financing these services? And that comes up all the time. So as we go through the semester and we start looking at different policies, these are some of the questions we're going to be looking at and asking. What's the purpose of the social welfare system? Well, when we get into the history next week, you'll find that it's to provide a safety net of emergency services. What if somebody's house just got flooded out and they have nowhere to go or they have no food? That's the role of, say, FEMA. To provide services that cannot be effectively provided on an individual basis. So is there a way that we can provide services to a group of people much more effectively than if we do it one person at a time in terms of funding and all of this and other things. So then we have to look at policy development. And this concept is important for you to know. And don't be surprised if you see a question on the quiz about this. But we have residual services. This calls for organized public interventions when the normal resources of family and the marketplace break down. So that food stamps, good example. What happens when people don't have enough food to eat and they can't afford food? Then we provide SNAP or food stamps. Social services are required when a problem cannot be addressed by individual resources. So again, in the example of food stamps, we're providing people a way to get food because they have no other way to do it. Social welfare programs can also take an institutional approach, and that is when the program is seen as a normal part of the social structure. So institutional social welfare policy sees providing service as a legitimate function of society. Something like the library, although technology has kind of changed what we expect from the library these days. The library or the police station, these would be an example of institutional services that everyone uses and seems like a legitimate service for us to provide. There are two ways that we provide services. Services can be done by universality, meaning that anybody in the society, regardless of income and means, benefits from the service. Again, library is a good example. Nobody cares how much money you make. Everybody gets a library card if they want one. Selectivity is when services are restricted to those who can demonstrate a need through eligibility criteria. So again, that goes back to something like SNAP or food stamps, where people are deemed not making enough money and not having enough resources to be able to provide food for themselves. As we go along this semester, you're going to see some problems with how we determine that eligibility. That often comes up. So, some examples, a universal service that's residual would be FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Act, where we're providing services based on the fact that, that these people had a need, because you can't obviously predict a flood or a hurricane or whatever. We can't keep it from happening. Selective residual services would be things like cash assistance, food stamps, or Medicaid. Again, those are for people who have a need, but there's eligibility requirements attached to it. An example of universal institutional services would be things like public education, fire, and police protection, because everyone in the society benefits from this and it's provided to everyone. Selective would be Social Security, Medicare. So in other words, everyone in the society, it can be eligible for institutional services, but it is selective in that you have to be a certain age or disabled or those kinds of things. So, we talked about this, or this came up already once, but it'll keep coming up, and that is values and beliefs. A value is the worth, desirability, or usefulness placed on something. So some of us value things more than others, so not everybody shares the same values. A belief is an opinion or a conviction. It's what you absolutely think is to be true. And again, that varies. Both have shifting impact on welfare policy. Some people value some things more than others, and so when they get in power and decide to make certain policies, they shift it in a way that not everyone else may agree with because their values may be different or their beliefs or opinions are different. Religion or religious values have also played an impact on social welfare policy. The development of social welfare services can be traced to values reflected in whatever the dominant religion of the country was at the time. So when we start looking at history next week and you see us go back enough time in England, you're going to see that there were certain religion or religious values that affected what services were delivered at that time and how they were delivered. The goals of religious charitable efforts are usually, or were in the past, to uphold moral character, maintain humbleness, and help those who the church deemed less fortunate. We all have our own personal values, and they're shaped by our own experiences and reflect our personal beliefs. And this can vary greatly from person to person. It's influenced by our backgrounds, our families, and it can even overlap with religious beliefs. So there are two competing yet strong values that shape policy. Social responsibility and citizenship. So we feel like we have a responsibility to our fellow citizens to provide certain things and work toward the good of everyone. And another competing value is hard work and self-sufficiency. The idea that if somebody works hard enough, that they'll be able to have enough food to eat and a place to live, and that if they don't have those things, maybe they're not working hard enough or they're lazy. So as you can see here, and this is in your textbook as well, there's a number of completing beliefs. Who's the undeserving and the deserving, who deserves help and social services and who doesn't. What's an individual responsible for, and what should the society or the social responsibility be? How much should an individual have to change, and how much should the society have to change? Self-sufficiency or social support, whether someone is entitled to help, or like, for instance, health care, that's a big one, or are we considering that a handout? And do we only help those we know, or do we help the strangers or anybody else? Might want to look at what happened with aid that we were providing to third world countries when President Trump took office in January. And again, here's a whole nother list of beliefs. I'm not going to go over all of them, but these are things that you should look at and think about, because when you get in the field or you look at what's happening on a national or state level with policies, often these belief systems are coming into play. So, here's what we need to consider. U.S. beliefs that we all should be able to have a freedom of choice. Do we all really have the freedom to choose how we all live our lives? How does that create social injustice? And how do social welfare policies and programs assist in providing choices? So those are some of the things that we really need to be thinking about and looking at when we look at policy. So that's